This is the main character, and he grew up to become a Giga Chad. And after returning from the army, he visited his childhood friend who turned out to be Kim Kardashian. In this video, you will see a lot of delicious moments. Watch to the end, or you will become Biden. The main character's city was the most beautiful city on planet Earth. It was located on a beautiful island with mountains and the sea. Everything was clean and alive. In childhood, the main character had a small group, with whom they ran through the mountains among the trees and had fun like that all the time. The sky was a faded blue. They swam in the sea together as a group, and every season was completely different in this beautiful city. The mountains and streams were constantly changing and looked beautiful in different ways, but there was something that really stood out to him. These were the words of a small child, or rather his girlfriend from this group of friends. Quite a long time has passed since childhood, but Jong Soo-hyun, that's the name of our main character, still lives in his hometown. He worked as a lifeguard on the beach and kept order on it so that no incidents occurred and everyone could relax. But Khan Beta worked with him on the beach and she constantly distracted him, pretending to check that he wasn't distracted, although he kept order. She distracted him from work and then he decided to look at the time, which is why he noticed that it was getting closer to him going to lunch. So right after that, he decided to go to lunch and take a little break from his work. He lived in a hotel, so they were waiting for him there. When he returned home, joyful housewife, whose name was Chan Miju, immediately came running to him. She has already prepared lunch for them. She cooked too much food, but she wasn't hungry herself, so she decided to call someone else for lunch, but she didn't answer Aries' calls. So then he decided to go himself and pick her up from work so that they could have a snack together and take a break from it all. The housewife at that moment began to worry about them because she thought that they were still not on good terms with each other. Soo-hyun went to the sea and started looking for Aries because he understood that she was somewhere there, and he was not mistaken, even though a lot had changed at sea. Aries was lying on the lounger covered with her Panama hat and dozing, but Soo-hyun was not going to wait for her to wake up, so he simply woke her up by removing the Panama hat. When she woke up, she was a little angry, because she came there so that no one would know about her location. Aries was 22, but she still didn't understand that she kept coming to the same place. Noticing him, she got up and started to leave from there, but he only came to say that the food at home was already ready, so she needed to come back and have lunch. At that moment, he remembered what happened 7 years ago when he had to leave there. Exactly 7 years ago, he left his home island with the dream of becoming a professional swimmer in a big city. For this, he did everything. After he left his home island, he entered Seoul Physical Education High School, and from that day on, he trained until exhaustion every day. But on the day he graduated from school, there was an accident. His parents, who were fishermen, changed their world as a result of this boating accident. At that time, he had absolutely no idea that something like this could happen. So when he learned about it, he lost even the ability to speak and was shocked. In the end, because of all this, he gave up his favorite swimming and joined the army. From childhood, he was a materialist, and even the army could not change this worldview. When he returned to his hometown after demobilization, they met him. That day, Aunt Miju accepted him as her own child and told him that he could safely stay in their guest house as long as he wanted. Everyone greeted him with special attention, but Aries continued to maintain her cold attitude towards him even after such a long time. Another girl in their group is said to have gone to college in this city after she turned 20, so she is not there now. Now after all this, his life has developed in such a way that in the morning he works part-time, and in the afternoon he helps at his aunt's house. For Soo-hyun, such a continuation of life seemed quite good, but there was one big drawback in all of this. These were their neighbors, who appeared sometimes. Every time couples checked into the hotel, they were convinced that the sound insulation was very poor, and the walls were like cardboard. Auntie didn't know what to do with all this, so she posted a warning asking hotel guests to be quiet at night, but her daughter quickly convinced her that this would drive away customers. It was the same with Soo-hyun. When he put up a notice that they needed to be quiet, no one began to comply with it and everything continued as usual. Soo-hyun decided to go outside to get some fresh air, but right at the exit he noticed his aunt, who was confused by the sounds from the other room. He went closer to the sea to breathe fresh air and look at beautiful places. At that moment he could not believe that his aunt was the mother of such an adult daughter, and suddenly thinking about her daughter, he noticed that Aries was sitting by the shore and decided to quietly approach her. Although he did not intend to scare her, he approached her to calmly talk to her, but she was not going to listen to him and began to leave him again, which irritated him very much. She was very scared when he approached and wanted to be alone again, so she ran away from him. Suddenly, before Aries left, Soo-hyun finally decided to ask why she behaved like that with him, because he should have been offended. On the way to his house, he noticed that a married couple had come out, so he thought that now the house would be much quieter. But suddenly he again heard strange sounds from the room and decided that he should go and give them a warning. But he remembered that the couple had left there. He stood under the door and began to quietly observe what was happening there because it was his aunt's room. But he was horrified when he saw that it was his aunt who was rowdy. During her game, Aunt dreamed about Soo-hyun, and at that moment he found out about it, which became very embarrassing and shameful for him. During his childhood, they met their entire group at school, but there was one girl, namely Eri, with whom he did not get along from the very beginning. On the very first day, they quarreled with each other at school when they first met, so the teacher decided to punish them and force them to go home holding hands. Holding hands, they left school and returned home, but all their classmates passing by laughed at this and it annoyed them. Then at one point, little Eri asked him to quickly take her home so that they would no longer have to endure this. He tensed because she squeezed his hand tighter. When he reached their house, their mother, who was still young at that time, came out to meet them, who was glad that Eri had found a good friend. He remembered this moment clearly, because then he thought that Eri's mother was actually her sister, due to the fact that she was young. From that very moment, they had happy times and sometimes sad ones, but all this was united by the fact that he was considered part of their family. Because of what happened last night, Soo-hyun was very tired because he couldn't even sleep properly and was thinking about what happened all night. The next day, in the morning, they acted as if nothing had happened because no one knew about what he accidentally noticed last night. But he was haunted by the thoughts of what he noticed yesterday, even though it was his childhood friend who was also the mother of his friend. Because of all this, he began to get very angry, because he had a desire to watch it again, but he returned home thinking that he needed to stop, because they were family. Soo-hyun returned home and noticed that his aunt was in the yard getting clothes ready to be washed, so he decided to give her his t-shirt. But he couldn't even think about what happened to his aunt at that moment, because she froze in shock because of what she saw, how handsome Soo-hyun was. As soon as he opened the front door, he completely accidentally met his friend, who was also preparing things for washing. But he didn't expect her to be in such a state, so he opened the door without knocking. This made her very angry and she threw a basin at him. That night he was very upset, because after that he couldn't even have a proper dinner with them because of Eri, who continued to be angry with him. He couldn't gather his thoughts because of what had happened over the past few days, or rather because of what he had seen during these days. So he decided that he had no choice but to calm his head by playing some single-player game. He was already completely ready to play alone, but suddenly his aunt ran into the room, scared of a huge insect. But seeing that at that moment he had already begun to play, she slowly but embarrassedly closed the door and stood behind her. Then Soo-hyun thought that now everything would definitely end, and he would be kicked out of the house the next morning. So he got ready and decided to pack his things in advance. But he noticed that the aunt did not leave there and was waiting for him to let her into the room. Then he thought that she was not even going to wait for the morning. Soo-hyun was very upset because he liked living there, but she suddenly started talking about how he might not be comfortable living with them. My aunt was embarrassed, but at the same time, she really wanted to try out the game for two with him. So I offered to help him with this. But as soon as he heard this, he was so shocked that he could not even move or say a word about it. From extreme stress, he began to sweat and began to remember everything that he was taught in the army. But he never found the answer to act like a man. Aunt was serious and was not going to back down to achieve her goal and play with him. But Soo-hyun at that moment decided to blame it all on the fact that he simply had a lot of energy accumulated due to the fact that he stopped playing sports. Then his aunt began to apologize to him for saying so many strange things to him, but something awkward happened. At that moment, Soo-hyun again had a strong desire to play with someone, and aunt immediately noticed this because it was because of her. She couldn't help herself, and decided to relieve him of this tension and play around so that he could fully relax. Soo-hyun was going crazy about what was happening to him now, because he didn't expect this to ever happen. His aunt was a professional player of such games and made him really feel what the game was like. Because of his excellent game, Soo-hyun could not restrain himself and almost sent the ball into the goal, but it was a little wrong. The game ended quickly. Right after Soo-hyun lost in this game, Aunt regained consciousness and realized what she had just done. Aunt was very embarrassed and immediately ran away from there, apologizing to him. Soo-hyun couldn't even stop her and stayed in the room. The night passed and my aunt still could not come to her senses and did not believe what she could do last night. Suddenly, Soo-hyun came into her kitchen, but she didn't expect to see him at that moment and pretended that nothing had happened, although she immediately turned away. She asked him to wait a little in her room because the food was not ready yet. The three of them sat down at the table, and then Soo-hyun thought that she didn't care at all about what happened yesterday. The aunt continued to pretend that nothing had happened and suddenly started talking to him about ordinary things because her daughter was nearby. Soo-hyun went to work and sat at his post like a security guard, but his thoughts were in a completely different place and he couldn't concentrate. He didn't understand what happened last night with his aunt, although she didn't seem to be going to avoid him. He was in his own thoughts and didn't pay attention to what was happening nearby, so he didn't even notice how his girlfriend climbed up to his tower. Soo-hyun was very scared when she suddenly appeared in front of him, and because of this, he became angry with her. But Soo-hyun couldn't sleep well last night, so now he was also tired, and at that moment, his girlfriend began to approach him, which caused him to have other thoughts. The friend didn't have to wait long to see the outcome of these thoughts because Soo-hyun couldn't control it. Soo-hyun was very embarrassed when he realized what she was telling him when she tried to tell him that he had not played anything for a long time. A friend noticed this and decided that she could play a joke on him because he had already accumulated gaming desires, so she said that she could help him with this. But this only frightened him even more so that he jumped back. She didn't understand why he was so serious. The first part of the day had passed, so Soo-hyun was already returning to his home, but during this whole part of the day, his girlfriend was embarrassing him at work. Soo-hyun was also worried that he would have to look into his aunt's eyes, but suddenly he heard house. It was an aunt who was talking to clients on the street who arrived ahead of time, due to which a certain situation occurred. They arrived a day early, so there was no room left for them, but Soo-hyun offered to send them to another place. Unfortunately, the situation is the same there. But at that moment, Soo-hyun decided to offer to vacate his room, thereby greatly surprising his aunt. She was worried about him because now he had to look for accommodation for the night, but he could go to his friends and told her not to worry. He did this so that his aunt would not have problems with work, but she stopped him and offered to stay in their room. Ari understood the situation, but was not happy with the fact that now she would have to sleep in the same room with him and was angry about it. Then the aunt told her to stop because Soo-hyun was part of their family and they couldn't leave him outside at such a time. These words made Ari think for a second, but after that same second she became even more angry and left the house. Soo-hyun understood that it was all because of him, but his aunt reassured him that Ari was just shy. That's why she behaved like that. It was night in the yard, and Soo-hyun couldn't sleep because of his thoughts. He couldn't believe that they were playing around, even though they were family. Suddenly Ari woke up and left her room because strange sounds appeared again. Then Soo-hyun was left alone with his aunt. At that moment, she suddenly woke up and tried to wake him up, because of the sounds from the game, she also wanted to do this. Ari again went closer to the shore, but noticing a couple in love there, she remembered Soo-hyun and his words in the same place. She understood that Soo-hyun didn't do anything to her and was part of her family, but she was just as stupid as Soo-hyun. At the same time, Auntie really just wanted to talk to Soo-hyun about what happened yesterday because she was so embarrassed about it. She admitted to him that for a very long time she wanted to play with such a cool guy like him, but she thought that he was upset that he played with such an aunt. At that moment, he realized why she had been acting so strangely all day and decided to cheer her up because he was not upset at all. In fact, it seemed to him that his aunt felt very bad at that moment because she ran away from him very quickly. Aunt realized that he didn't mind playing football again, so she invited him to continue the game starting from the second part. Soo-hyun could no longer hold back, so he grabbed the cabbage and began squeezing it until it released juice. The juices began to squeeze out very quickly because he began to squeeze them out himself and not just squeeze the cabbage. He also had ice cream, which he immediately decided to eat. It was very tasty, and not only he enjoyed it, Aunt went crazy because she was very pleased that he appreciated the ice cream that she provided him. Auntie understood that at this rate, if he continued to play with the food she gave him, she would have a happy ending. But she understood that this way she would be the only one who liked all this, so she decided to offer him something better than this. He was very embarrassed at that moment because his aunt, who always smiled at him, was now making such an expression on her face that he had never seen. But Soo-hyun couldn't help the fact that it really pushed him to play with her because he liked it. But the aunt managed to notice that he was close to losing, so she stopped so that she could calmly let him lose and not so abruptly. She asked him to wait a little so that he could enjoy this game fully. And now the ball has hit the goal exactly. On their small field, the ball constantly hit the goal, but she also decided to offer him watermelons, which he did not refuse. They continued the game and the balls flew into the goal like family, but not a single ball has yet broken this goal. But some time passed and Soo-hyun scored the last ball so quickly that it tore the goal. He was happy with his throw. The game ended at that moment, but they did not have time to hide the traces of the game and the front door suddenly opened, which frightened them very much. Ari was returning to her home at that moment and was very angry that the game of their residence was still not over and they were making noise. She entered her room and was very surprised that at that moment, Soo-hyun and Mom were sleeping peacefully. She was jealous of them. In fact, before Ari came to the room, a man who was renting a room in their hotel entered their room, having mixed up the doors. They were very scared then, so they decided that it was time for them to stop this game and go to bed peacefully so that nothing would happen. The next morning, Eri woke up second. Aunt always woke up early in order to have time to prepare breakfast for everyone. Then Eri noticed that Soo Hyun was still sleeping very soundly and decided to stand over him and watch him sleep. She wanted to pet him, but suddenly her mother burst into the room, so she got very scared and jumped away in the other direction. At that moment, because of the noise, Soo Hyun himself woke up, but Eri did not notice that after the game he did not remove the traces from himself. Aunt quickly hinted to him to tidy up the room, and he immediately understood it from her look. When Soo Hyun cleaned up, he immediately went to the kitchen to have breakfast with them as he usually did, but Eri complained about the food today. Then Aunt was confused because she was preparing breakfast as usual, so nothing should have changed and asked Soo Hyun. Soo Hyun at that moment replied that he really liked the food and thanked his aunt for it all. Eri at that moment could not understand what was happening between them because they behaved strangely, although they did not notice it. Soo Hyun was about to leave for his first job in the morning as usual, but suddenly Eri stopped him. She stopped him in order to apologize to him for yesterday because she really regretted it. But Soo Hyun didn't even remember anything about it, so he decided to ask her what she did wrong that she started apologizing to him. This embarrassed her very much because it made her look very stupid. She pushed him away from her and left the house. And Soo Hyun didn't even have time to understand what suddenly happened to her, that she started behaving so strangely. After some time, Eri decided to escort the guests out of the hotel, but then she was suddenly asked about her mother, thinking that it was her sister. The speaker about her mother was suddenly surprised when he found out that she was so young and thought that Soo Hyun was her father. At that moment, she was very surprised by this conversation, but decided not to pay attention, and the man's friend stopped him and they set off. Eri saw all the guests out of the hotel and decided that she could calmly go to the beach and finally relax in her place. But when she approached her place, she noticed that someone was lying there and did not even immediately realize that it was her own mother. Mom woke up as soon as she noticed that someone had approached her, and looking at the time, realized that she had to prepare dinner, so she quickly ran home. Eri then began to worry about her mother because she had been acting rather strangely since the morning. Before going to bed on the beach, she thought about the fact that Soo Hyun also began to behave strangely, but thought that it was not so strange. Auntie returned home and thought about what she had done to Soo Hyun, because before she always saw him as a little child, and now she was very ashamed because the child whom she constantly helped in childhood to play sports began to play with her. At that moment, she realized that he, of course, knew nothing about girls, so it turned out that she took advantage of him. The aunt began to think that she had acted very badly with this child, and now could not even understand how she would look at him. She couldn't pretend that nothing was happening, so she had to decide something and went to the bathroom to think. But in the bathroom, she suddenly met Soo Hyun and was very embarrassed because she thought she was alone at home. She came to the bathroom second, so she was already getting ready to leave there so that he could calmly continue to do his business there. But suddenly Soo Hyun grabbed her because the ball inflated again, due to the fact that he saw his aunt and she would have to play. She was embarrassed when he asked her to play the game again, but realized that she was the one who started it all, so she needed to take responsibility. Soo Hyun left all the decisions to her so that she could play the way she likes as long as he wins. It was quite strange when Auntie was like that, but my aunt felt it even then, because playing with a younger guy felt much different.
She played this game as carefully as possible so that he could relax and not worry about something happening.
But Soo Hyun suddenly took over all control of the game in order to feel it completely and relax. She couldn't believe he was so rude. At that moment, the aunt fully realized that if he continued to play this game with her in the same rude manner, then it would cause problems in the future. But he was not going to stop, because only he got pleasure from this game, and this was the starting point for defeating it. She couldn't believe that defeat could be so pleasant for her, but it was Soo Hyun. Aunt believed that they shouldn't be doing this at that moment, but Soo Hyun didn't care about it anymore and continued. At that moment, when he completely filled the gate and was on the verge of tearing it completely, she realized that he was no longer the little child she thought he was. She couldn't even believe what was happening, because she had never felt anything like this before. The pressure in this game from him was very aggressive and pleasant. At that moment, they completely enjoyed this game and could not resist each other because it was very pleasant. She had never felt the game so much that she understood how the ball was flying and where it would fly, but playing with him was just like that, and it was wonderful. Then she couldn't do anything except continue to enjoy it and take all the balls he threw. After a while, the game ended and my aunt began to think about what she should do with all this now. Several days have passed since that incident, and the work group of Soo Hyun's friend was at sea and caught all sorts of harmful things from the sea. But Soo Hyun's friend, as soon as she got out of the water, decided to show the watermelons that she earned with her honest labor, although the others tried to shame her for it. Then she suddenly noticed Soo-hyun, who was about to return home at that time, so she quickly ran towards him. She ran up to him and slapped him on the back to scare him, but at that moment he was calm and surprised her very much by this. But that was not the only thing she would remember today, because he decided to advise her to hide the watermelons because everyone was looking at them. These words from him embarrassed her very much, and at that moment she wanted to make fun of the fact that he was also looking at watermelons, but he didn't even deny it. Then she was even more surprised because she couldn't believe what happened to Soo-hyun, because he became serious and answered her directly. After returning home, Soo-hyun continued to communicate with his aunt as if nothing had happened, but he had a lot of thoughts about it in his head. Ever since the incident that happened with the aunt, she acted as if nothing had happened, so he had to follow her. He had no choice but to hide everything from Eri, but he hoped that they would return to their previous relationship, although he did not believe in it. From that day on, her behavior changed a lot, because she began to do things that she had never done before, and this also applied to what she was cooking, and also began to come to him at night to ask him to play with her so that she could relax. He didn't know what her intentions were at that moment, but then her daughter noticed her walking towards Soo-hyun and intercepted her to help her relax herself. But because Eri did something that she didn't even understand, Soo-hyun had to suffer at such moments. A whole night had passed since he had to suffer, because he could not play normally, and then he was tired and helped Eri and Hanbeta. They asked him to bring them a huge umbrella to the beach, so that the two of them could have a good rest there and not get burned under the sun. It was a beach that only the locals of this islet knew about, because it was not open to tourists due to the fact that there were a lot of rocks and strong waves. And only because of this it became their playground, since they were still children and constantly spent time with each other. But this was the first time they went there as adults to have fun like the good old days. While Eri walked away to open this big umbrella, Hanbata and Soo-hyun were left alone and Hanbata began to mock. Eri then noticed that she was frankly hitting on Soo-hyun and wanted him to play volleyball with her at sea. Soo-hyun tried his best to refuse this because he understood that if she continued to behave like this with him, then he would become very awkward there. But then she realized that this was a good chance to have a good laugh at him, and she decided to continue doing this so that his eyes were glued to her. Soo-hyun's thoughts at that moment did not coincide with how he really looked, because then he felt disgusted because of this. Because it was easy for him. Soo-hyun started to get really angry and worried after he left her, because now he had a big problem that he needed to hide. This day off for Soo-hyun was quite fun, because they were fooling around in the water as if they were little kids again and they were having fun. Eri at that moment, as always, tried to stay on the sidelines and rest for herself, but she didn't succeed, because Hanbata decided to start a water battle with her, so that she would not be sad alone and join them in their game. As soon as they came out of the water, they went ashore and decided to eat everything that they had brought with them on vacation. But at that moment, Soo-hyun was thinking about what he managed to say to Hanbata at that moment when he was not himself, although it seemed to him that she was not thinking about it. Then Hanbata suddenly decided to cheat and wanted to send Eri for a watermelon so that they would be alone with Soo-hyun and could talk. That's what happened, but Soo-hyun decided to take a nap until Eri returned to them, so then Hanbata cheated and asked him for something. Hanbeta decided at that moment to ask him to apply sunscreen to her so that she would not get burned at sea while they were there. As soon as he heard about this, he immediately woke up and forgot that he was even sleepy because he was very embarrassed. She, as usual, noticing that Soo-hyun began to be shy, decided to continue mocking him and joked about the fact that she was ready for the game. But Soo-hyun wasn't going to fall for these tricks, so he just decided to do it without hesitation or extra thoughts. It was natural, but it drove Soo-hyun crazy because he could barely control himself at that moment in order not to start playing with her. She continued to mock him and made fun of him at that moment and started saying all sorts of strange things out of her mouth. Hanbata was even very surprised that Soo-hyun began to do it so naturally, as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Eri, who went to the store to buy watermelons. I was very meticulous and chose them for a very long time, moving from store to store. After a while, Soo-hyun finished the first part and was very happy about it because he was close to losing his temper. But suddenly Hanbeta asked him to continue, and it already sounded as if she wanted him to play with her. She was very surprised at that moment when he did not refuse, but on the contrary asked her what he should do. But at that moment, he had already lost his ability to think and was only thinking about how he would play now. Then Hanbeta realized that she had stopped by starting to mock him, but it was already too late because he had begun his warm-up. She couldn't believe that he would be capable of something like that, so she was very surprised by this and tried to stop him. But she could no longer stop him because he moved on to take over her thoughts and make her desire this game. And it really worked because she couldn't do anything about the way her thoughts were changing at that moment. Hanbeta knew that she needed to stop, but it was very pleasant, so she couldn't do it. But Soo-hyun regained consciousness for a second. He asked her forgiveness for what he had just done, but at that moment she asked him to start playing football with her because she wanted the ball to go into the goal. Suddenly, other unknown people came to this beach who were tourists and did not know that there was anyone else there, but suddenly noticed a tent. Noticing the tent, they decided to go and check who was there, but then Soo-hyun and Kanbata managed to move away from there and continued to play. Kanbata Wee was completely ready for the game and was trying to restrain herself to wait until the tourists left their place. When they noticed that someone was nearby, they ran away from the place very quickly, so they scattered some things along the way. But he wasn't going to hold back and quietly made her feel as if she was really playing, and she was surprised because she felt very good. But for Hanbada, something seemed very strange. Namely, that Soo-hyun became very arrogant. So at one point she decided to take the game into her own hands and grab the ball. She realized that this was exactly the size of the ball that she needed. But she didn't stop there because the ball was still in the package, so she very quickly removed the package and was happy because everything was as she thought. This was incredible to her, so she realized that before they started playing, she would need to prepare the gate for the game to go well. Soo-hyun was very embarrassed by what she was doing, because the ball was very sensitive to this and affected Soo-hyun's behavior.
She took advantage of this and made him lose the first time without even using the goal, but immediately after that she decided to test whether the ball would be as hard if they continued.
The ball was very hard and Soo-hyun enjoyed every hit of this ball, because after each hit the ball flew completely into the goal. Because of what was happening in this goal, Soo-hyun would no longer be able to stop himself, so the game will continue until he hits all the balls into the goal. Auntie was at her house at that moment washing things, but at that moment she was thinking about Soo-hyun and who would be best suited for him. According to all the criteria, only Hanbada came to her mind, because she was still quite young and healthy, an active girl, and also very attractive, so she would be completely suitable for Soo-hyun. At the same time, Hanbada was having fun with Soo-hyun at the sea, because there they played little football, which was only for the two of them at that time. Hanbada couldn't believe that Soo-hyun was like this all the time, because she had never seen him so rude before. He scored every ball into a full goal. They were hiding and playing football, but suddenly they heard the sound of tourists who heard the sound of their ball, and it scared them very much at that moment. Soo-hyun realized that she was scared and started taking this game more seriously, so he decided to tease her and decided to continue, even though the tourists were still there. He was surprised that she was still not used to it. He convinced her that they wouldn't even hear anything over the noise of the waves. The gate became like a waterfall at that moment and was completely filled with water due to the balls thrown there. All this happened because of the pleasure of playing at sea. Airi by that time was already returning to the beach with a watermelon which she had gone for and was a little angry because they did not answer her calls and did not come out to help. But suddenly, when tourists noticed Airi, one of the guys in this company decided to approach her and hitch a ride to get her number and get acquainted. But by this moment, Soo-hyun had already approached Airi, who had already finished his game. Airi was happy about this in her heart, but in life she only scolded him for not approaching her earlier because she had a hard time with the watermelon. Airi then decided to ask him where Kanbata was, but he only said that she was very tired, so she was now resting on the beach. Airi returned, so they again needed to be the three of them in this company, but Hanbada behaved strangely after this game because of the sensations. They ate a very tasty watermelon and wanted to continue having fun, but Airi noticed that after her return they behaved strangely. Kanbata could not concentrate on resting because she was still mentally there where they played football. After that, she decided to just leave in the middle of the day and didn't call Soo-hyun anymore, so he thought about calling her first. He was about to dial her number on the phone when she suddenly appeared right in front of him and was joyful because she thought that he was thinking about her. But Soo-hyun felt embarrassed at that moment, so he decided to pretend that he had no reason to think about her. She explained to him that he behaved like a bad boy because after he did this to the girl, he did not even call her and said that she was waiting for his call. Because of his thoughts about what was happening between him and his girlfriend, he could not focus on work, so he decided to turn to his aunt for advice. He decided to tell her all this under the guise that it happened to his friend, but she immediately realized that it happened to him. All this was obvious because Soo-hyun was quite attractive and cool, so he could easily get ears. It was natural, but because of this, the aunt began to be jealous of him. So she herself did not notice how angry she became and left there without even talking to him.